And the UDO contains many of those connecting threads, but just as an example, and I can send it out after I refine it a little bit. The comprehensive plan uses the words a variety of housing types. And I think a number of you pointed that out. The where to that, the comprehensive plan itself says in large developments, generally in large developments. Now, how does the UDO deal with the how? In a similar vein, if you look at the comprehensive plan, it talks about moderately priced housing in policy 6.7. It says some land development should be devoted to moderately priced. It doesn't give any further, but that's a connecting thread between that policy and the UDO. And then a third that I think many of you pointed out, mixed-use development in policy 6.10. The comprehensive plan says inappropriate locations. Now, you just talked about what a land use plan could do, should do. That phrase, and I'm just the facilitator, you're the committee, begs for some way to visualize, put on a map, well, what are those appropriate locations? Can you do it by words? I'm not sure. That is why most communities have resorted to having a map that shows where different types of uses would go. There's so much in this policy, and I think your homework really pointed it out. If that helps at all, think about what you're about is getting from the what to the where, and then how should it be regulated or controlled. Ready to move on?
Yes.
Let's jump into it. Policy 6.1. Let's see.
I did reorganize the building.
Okay. Yeah, just as I looked at the homework and saw how many of you were focusing on certain things, your comments on accessory housing came up over and over again, and it comes up in 2 or 3 different policies, two policies for sure. So I asked Carrie, for the sake of economizing on your discussion tonight, to group those very, very similar comments. And a number of you, as you sent comments in, it said, see my comments on an earlier policy. So let's jump into this. And this is in policy area 6.1. That does say that residential development should be remain mostly low-density single-family, but appropriate instances for other housing forms such as small detached and accessory housing should be fostered. Let's see the recommendation that was pulled and consolidated include in the UDO appropriate instances for housing types other than low-density, single-family detached in other zoning districts other than PD.
That's not what you sent us though, right?
I know, that's why I separated it out, that's what Phil was saying.
Okay.
So I separated it out, PD, traditional, those that focus on using PD, those that focused on mixed use in the non-residential districts.
Okay.
So, Bill made me do that.
I guess one thing I'd like to say,
see our names.
well, about the PD, this uses,
Let's go back to the operator.
this uses OSRD, right, in the comp plan. And the UDO doesn't have OSRD at all, correct?
Why did that get taken out? What brought that on? Why all of a sudden did we go from RS40 to OSRD to now just RS40 and PD?
Shall we curl back? Let's see the phrasing in 6.1.
So,
Why did it
yeah,
just
so
all of a
Carrie,
sudden
so
get
Carrie,
taken out?
was that the previous planner's, decision was to remove that from something that was originally there, or was it never there?
It was there, it was a staff decision. I don't know
Which step were
who made the decision or how it was made.
And then she also mentioned,
Probably just as well. I can't say one way or the other.
she talked about OSRDM, which I tried to research it, couldn't find much about it, but I think that's mixed use. And then there's also something called OSRDIP, which is similar kind of to a plan development from what I could tell, and allows, you know, more flexibility. So in my opinion, taking out OSRD is not something that should have ever happened.
Let's look at this, this is as Carrie first consolidated your comments and into a proposed possible recommendation. Church, you have a comment on
Yes,
what you see?
So in those areas where you're talking about allowing for other types of development, is there a thought about increasing the density in those areas? I mean, it seems like to me you would have to allow that if you're gonna allow some other types
Well, it's
of
other than
higher
low.
density.
Other than low density does speak to that. But we're not here to decide what that means, what higher means. It's other than low density.
It's kind of vague.
But the
It
comp
is.
plan does talk
But
about
we
that.
can be here for months.
Later on, I think one of the recommendations talks about reconciling density and districts and lot size and all of that.
Yes.
So as this is phrased, does anybody have any comment? Does it pick up what you were getting at? Include appropriate instances for housing types other than low-density single-family in the traditional zoning districts, in addition to, or as well as PD, which it now is in the current draft, and/or OSRD type zoning.
I wanted to put that in there.
That's the first sentence. And then the second may detail that bit. Permit a variety of housing types in the OI and the BN districts. So, Church, you're asking, well, where would that be? The suggestion here in this draft is permit that variety in the OI and BN.
Which is what it says in the comprehensive plan, on strategy number 2. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And the
It just
third-
seems like it needs to go deeper around the, I guess to your point, Karen, you could be here all
It
day.
definitely has to go deeper.
Yeah, around, what does that mean?
And what's
If you're gonna allow for
appropriate.
other housing types, how does that, you're gonna have to address the density issue to allow for that to occur.
Yeah.
And I guess that's not our job,
That's not our job.
but, I mean, it just seems like to me there's, it's a little open to interpretation.
Bob, yeah, question?
Terry, could you explain the current OSRD regulations and ordinance
Yeah.
specifics as compared to what we've reviewed so far around the PD?
Sure, and just following really quickly, it's meaningful for you guys to give parameters that you would like to see used in determining density. That's what your job is you can give parameters based on the comp plan about what you think density means. But, and you can reread it for just asking that question.
They're right
But
in.
that, sorry,
No.
that ties into the whole water issue.
Mhm.
It really ties into the whole water issue. Getting a better handle on that, getting a report that has some merit to it, not relying on a 10-year-old, or however old that report is, and having some, having a reliable,
It was another
Water.
good reason why we're not doing it here in this
yeah.
committee's format.
Yeah, Bob, you had a comment?
OSRD zoning,
OSRD?
the way our current OSRD zoning is, or any actually, there's typically a percentage of open space that has to be set aside with an acreage, and it's a calculation. If you have 100 acres, you have to put 50 of it in open space. And then there's a bunch of definitions and parameters about what counts as open space and what you can do with it, what you can do in it. And then the remainder of the acreage, and for Summerfield it is 50%, can be developed to as small as 15,000 square foot lots. So anybody's open space district will have a lot size restriction and an open space restriction. And then the overall density of our OSRD is that 0.73 units an acre.
So how does that differ from what's in here on the PD, where we have the PD as a zoning district here?
In the ordinance that you're looking at, the PD is really not defined. I mean, it's got very little, I believe that it was going to be geared towards some open space.
So if we added some,
But you can decide if you want, open space is your,
so if we suggested certain open space and density requirements to what the PD in here, it essentially becomes the OSRD that we have today.
whatever you call it, it's about parameters. What are the parameters? Density, open space, and I hesitate, or ask you to hesitate in identifying measures of what density, and not density needs to be measured, but what open space in particular, because what is it that you want open space to do? And if a property has a lot of it that does that, then there should be reserved more than 50% on a particular property. If you have a property that doesn't do anything valuable according to the comp plan, there's no historic features, there's no sensitive areas, there's no, nothing that, unless you value open space for recreation, then it will be based on that. I really feel strongly that these things need to be site-specific with parameters, with set parameters. I'm not saying that it should be open-ended, but it should be meaningful.
Sure.
Excuse me.
Sorry, no, you're good.
The OI and BN districts,
Those are the office and, or
Business.
office, institutional, and business districts. There's only 2 non-residential districts in this ordinance. So
Okay,
basically, that's what it's saying, is in non-residential. It's allowing for a variety of housing types in the residentials, and for a mix of uses that would allow housing in the commercial districts.
If we had a more defined PD, how does that differ from an ORSD, or can they be the same?
The main difference between a PD and OSRD is the amount of design that's done ahead of time.
I'd like
The
to
amount
say
of
there's a
planning.
difference in the name too.
Yeah, there's a difference in the name, but the tool, the zoning tool that is PD has a lot more detail up front before something is rezoned. That's really
So-
the main difference. And
so
OSRD has
It's more,
a more generalized. And it still has parameters that are handled later, but frankly, land development is much less for an administrator, far fewer decisions for an administrator to make. Because it would be proffered at the zoning.
But Marlene had suggested that we have both, and I guess it's because with the PD, with an OSRD, the developer's gonna come in and know, I mean, it's more general in what they have to do, and they're gonna know upfront, this is what we're gonna get for residential, this is it, they can do they can do the residential plan, and it's done. As with the PD, for very specific sites and everything, there's so many more hoops that if you're looking to get open space and all this kind of stuff, it seems like for residential that an OSRD would be the way to go, whereas with a PD, you might just get a whole bunch of lots that are,
And it depends on what you're looking for each one, because the names really mean nothing.
yeah.
You're looking for a mix of uses, you're looking for a mix of housing types, you're looking for, and Marlene is right, the more predictability there is, the more a developer can know and hit a specific price point and respond to a market, which really is and there's many of us that aren't downsizing or millennials, but might have income issues as well. So we're just missing we're just missing a real big middle.
Does anybody see the need for refining this, or could anybody want to suggest refining that, any part of those 3 sentences?
We can come back to them if their issues aren't addressed elsewhere.
There's really sort of 3 separate recommendations
So-
embedded within this one.
So can we still leave the, since we're not gonna answer the density, can we go back to what we were talking about and add to the science? And add something about the science of septic and water, ladder density?
If you were suggesting some
Yeah.
language,
Because we're talking about how vague the density is. I don't think it's always gonna be vague, but at least
Yeah.
maybe we can say, well, we're gonna use the science of septic and wells, so we're not just grabbing.
Right.
considering the best available science
Yeah,
regarding
yeah,
soils and hydrology.
on how we're gonna figure out what that density is.
I wrote the word contribute there, sorry.
Does there need to be, maybe not, does there need to be further definition around housing types, or just leave it at that? I mean,
If your guide is the comprehensive plan, and this policy, the comprehensive plan calls out such as, but it doesn't limit. Without writing.
Yeah, maybe it's not housing type, because all houses are houses.
No, a
And so-
housing type
so maybe
is a
it's how-
four-pack versus a duplex versus a single-family home. That's a housing type, and
Okay.
it might be, actually, a housing type is more about what the structure appears to be from the outside.
I was thinking something more like housing costs or something like that, if we're trying to
No,
get
it's housing type, and
Yeah.
housing type
affordability.
follows the market to allow it to mix housing type with cost.
Okay.
That terminology follows.
I think that's why it's important we define the density, because that's gonna help define what we are gonna be able to build. And going on what Beth said, I mean, well and septic is gonna be very restrictive out here. It's gonna prevent a lot of things from being done. That's why all the developers go into Greensboro, because they've got sewer and they've got water, and that's why you have high density there, and that's why that works there. So we're always gonna have that restriction anyway. But the good thing about, or the one positive things about OSRD, it emphasizes 2 things: open space, it's in the name, which is what we want if we want to keep the rural character, and it emphasizes residential, which is the other thing that's so important about Summerfield. You know, there's a recent study, Business Journal came out, they looked at all the communities in North Carolina. Summerfield was 92 in North Carolina for the community. It gets, you know, an A for schools, it gets an A for housing. You know, we're doing something right here. So we gotta be careful how we're going to change what we're doing here, because what we have is kind of working, and it's what attracts people from coming out here. And I think it goes back to something that Ryan said, we're not, should we focus our zoning laws over one group of people or another group of people? Because I don't see that when I'm selling on a daily basis in real estate. Millennials are not coming to Summerfield to live out here. Most of the people, I worked with 2 people this past week, they're all looking in the 350 to 500 range. These people are moving up. They want a bigger house, they want a good school system, and they want half the tax bite. That's why they're coming out here. The millennial people, I'm sorry, census reports came out recently again in the Greensboro papers. Suburbs are still really big, so is downtown, and that's where all these people are going. The predominant construction industry, and we have somebody sitting here in the room today who can attest to that, the dominance in the construction industry has been rental housing. And those are the people you're getting. You're not going to build rental housing if people aren't going to use it. So market forces are always going to kind of be a big influence of what gets built and what doesn't get built. And I'll tell you something, another factor that nobody's taking in, construction costs have gone through the roof. And I'm currently doing a really big expansion on my house that I have here, and I can tell you the lumber costs gone through the roof. And they're up 50% of where they are. So while everybody wants to build affordable housing, building that affordable housing, it's like, what's your definition of affordability?
It's in the compromise.
Because that's very much going to change over time, because it's going to be real hard to build a cheap house anymore, because if a developer can't make any money, it's like any of us that runs our own business. If you can't make any money, why are you going to do it? You're not. You're going to go with your market forces say, this is what I'm building this because this is what I can sell. And that's what they've been doing out here for a long time.
well, but
But if
you're only building a certain type, because that's all
That's all
the
that's
density
allowed to be
allows you to do. I can guarantee you, if you build other alternative housing, they will come. but we don't have the ability to do that.
Well, we give us that ability, a builder right now, he can build $150,000 house, or he can build a $500,000 house with the zoning laws we have.
No,
But
Could I call you back to the
it's gotten so
recommendation?
expensive, it makes it very difficult to do that. So with the
What?
OSRD,
I feel like they
we
would
can
be
allow.
doing that.
Let me,
They
I
would
think
be doing
we're
that.
getting
One
somewhere
conversation.
when we talk about allowing for other housing types and potentially looking at different densities in certain areas of Summerfield where it makes sense. I'm not talking about the entire town, but certain areas of Summerfield where we can do some of this alternative type of housing instead of the
Right, and that's why we're
mansions.
talking about land
Yeah.
use, and that's what we're talking about. With
Yeah,
the OSRD, we're allowing that flexibility for maybe a little closer, smaller lots, because we're allowing for the open space to make up for that.
But we
But
haven't
for-
changed our density, we're still saying 0.73. We haven't
Exactly.
changed our density.
Exactly, and
But if you allow the smaller lot sizes, you're able to do that.
We're allowing 15,000 square foot lots, that's a quarter acre.
Right, so if you
We
go
allow
down to
it
that,
now.
you
The builder still has to buy
But
the
if-
100,000 acres.
exactly.
I-
We haven't changed it, we haven't changed
He can only
his
build a
price.
50.
I heard
Still
the
spending.
gist of a recommendation concerning the density, but could somebody articulate that? You're sort of working around it, that there needs to be something that addresses density and soil suitability, something like.
Well, we,
I was gonna say, I feel like the one that just passed on Scalesville, they kind of did get a good density because it sounds like the 62 acres and they did the OSRD, much of it wouldn't be buildable if they tried to just divide it and build a normal subdivision.
Their site plan wasn't approved though.
It was.
It
Oh,
was.
It
was
was
it?
Monday night,
Oh,
it was
right.
approved, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for the update.
I read the
Well,
minutes.
let's see what the market price of that house, of those housing.
There'll be
that
400,000.
What I mean though is that amount of land, they're doing really well for their money considering they're getting 42 homes
Well, we don't know what they're marketing those homes
on,
as, we can't say
on
that.
that land because otherwise it seems like it wouldn't perk and
It does
they
perk.
got
It
the
does
10 acres of Duke Tower counted towards their open space, which wouldn't have counted, they
We
couldn't
do
have
that
done
everywhere.
anything with
They can-
anyway,
You can own that,
but you can't build on it.
but
We
you
have
could-
lots of areas like that in open space in Summerfield, it's not unique to that property.
It's good for
recharge.
It
Right.
is exactly good, very good.
Any,
It just seems like
are there any
they did well.
suggestions
It was a
about
good
changing
compromise.
the language that you see on this recommendation?
Well,
There's
we
a lot
had-
in it.
We had an expert last time talk about density, right? And she kind of said that our .76 really should be, or .73,
Could be one.
do it the other way, right? It should be 1, right? She said
Could be
one house per 1 acre.
But it really couldn't
But she
go
said it
much
really
beyond.
could, I mean, they see well and septic all over the country at .75.
One, mean one house. per-
One house per
Point,
point.
three-quarter acre.
Three-quarter acre, exactly.
Her point was using the science of the land, and another really big point that she made is that a community can never have enough moderately priced housing to just respond to economic changes, to respond to whatever market. I'm not gonna, we can't really say what anybody wants just from what we project from our own experiences and from data. The same kind of thing.
Can we put some language in there along the lines of, the density in these areas where we're gonna allow other housing would be reviewed and adjusted based on some data of some sort? I mean,
Beth used the word scientific data or something to that effect.
yeah, yeah.
Can you, let's see what that looks like. Let's see if this addresses that. You're getting out a lot of information coming in this first recommendation, but it's a big policy.
That recommendation is probably gonna land on a number of these as we go along.
Okay?
So what else? Wouldn't you wanna add recharge as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Recharge.
Let's see what the,
There may be other
uh,
elements from the comp plan itself.
Current water study.
We've been talking about here, though, about different housing types. And but we're trying to achieve affordable housing though. Is there something we need to put in that language for that? Because I mean, if we just start building townhomes, well, we could just be building $600,000 townhomes. I mean, we could. It's
Let
higher
me do a
density.
little steering as sort of a traffic cop here.
I don't like the term affordable housing, especially for
But
Summerfield.
it
In a
says
later-
in the complaint.
And-
I
In a
mean, it
later
says
policy-
affordable housing
And there's
strategy.
nothing to worry about.
No,
Don't let that
policies
word
talks about
make you
moderately
turned off.
priced
housing. Because out here tonight, affordable is not gonna be quite affordable.
But I guess my question is, why did the people who wrote this have affordable housing strategy number 1, number 2, and number 3?
Exactly.
And they define affordable housing, right? I mean, it's all in here. It doesn't say that that means we have to put trailer parks up or that we have to
It's
put,
not a bad word.
it's not a bad word.
There you go.
It's
I mean, it
affordable
is-
for Summerfield is the way it's described.
There you go.
What is affordable for Summerfield? Summerfield affordable, and the other word that comes out of that is moderately priced, and it's defined. And I would venture to guess that 250 is low.
Well, none of that's gonna happen unless you change the density, and unless you get a handle on the whole water issue.
So the addition suggested by Church, and I think picked up on by something that said, adding to this recommendation, density should be reviewed and determined based on the science of the land, including soils, groundwater recharge, and other elements from the comprehensive plan.
The capability of all of those things, recharge capability, soil capability,
Any,
and we can flesh this out. Other
Well, I mean,
elements.
that's gonna cover most of policy area 6.
well, that addresses a whole lot.
Boom, we're done.
That's exactly what it
9
says.
minutes.
Let's go to 5.
Are you ready to move on to the next recommendation? Let's see what's
Let's go to
up
5.
there.
Is some of that though site specific as well? So this isn't a, everywhere across Summerfield, it has to be this number.
No, it's site specific.
It has to be site specific, because in certain sites, I'm gonna have far more runoff than I'm gonna have in other sites.
So that's why the science of the land.
So science of the land
Yeah,
of
that
the
goes-
site, not just,
Okay.
right, it's not
That's why
just.
you need amber claims.
Okay.
The original pre-approvals for plan and development addressed a lot of those issues, did they not, Karen?
I'm sorry?
The original pre-approval requirements in plan and development addressed a lot of those issues in terms of the community having control over whether a proposed plan got approved or not based upon the site-specific
Yes,
issues.
the mistake that it made is it should have had some sort of cap.
Right.
You know, some sort of, which, and the land is going to cap
Yeah.
it because of septic and recharge capabilities, but
But we know what
that was
happens
just
when
really,
there's not
really
enough.
too hard to digest.
We may come back to this again. We definitely will come back on your re-review. But let's look at the next major recommendation. This gets into the accessory dwelling. Add wording to include accessory or small attached housing to the intent statement for the RS.
Is this Bob, because Bob, you contradicted this later, is this what you meant to say?
Adding it to the intent statement. This is just the specific place where we
That
go.
introduction part of the,
Anybody want to discuss that? Let's go to the next one then. This has to do with a bona fide farm.
The second sentence is a
Okay, the recommendation embedded within this is that review the UDO for compliance with state definitions and other regulations for bona fide farms. This is sort of a note to whoever does the rewrite of the UDO. Make sure that it picks up the state definition. Any comment on that?
So I can tell you that the definition is based on farm use and size and farms producing a certain amount of product.
Makes them a bona fide farm.
There's other details to it, but that's the premise
And they are exempt from zoning regulations.
altogether. in the state of North Carolina. As long as they're farm uses or farm-related uses. The
So
definition
you
that
can't-
goes on and on.
You can't build an office building on a farm.
Or apartments.
Yeah, well, you can, when something is located on the farm because of its farm location, it still counts as a bona
You
fide
can't
farm
put an
use.
insurance company office on a farm.
It depends on whether it's only selling farms, I guess. I don't know, I wouldn't wanna go there.
Okay, move on to the next recommendation. This one, let's see the next screen.
This is another big one.
Okay, this is recognize the value of a lot of these related to the PD, since the way the draft is written, that PD is maybe the only district where a lot of these variety of housing types could go, as written. Recognize the value of a planned development type zone to fulfill the policies of the comprehensive plan. Strengthen the language in the PD to regulate overall size, use, density, open space, dimensions, and other standards. And then encourage the inclusion of moderately priced housing in this district.
Instead of saying that, could we say, follow the strategies listed in the comp plan?
Where? How do you-
Well, where we say encourage the inclusion of moderately priced housing,
Okay,
wouldn't that be more following the strategy listed in the comp plan? I mean, that's where we want alignment.
You're talking about the language that follows the
Yeah.
policy items?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that,
There was also that part that Marlene
Yes.
mentioned too about the incentives, that our incentives may have been a little low though, so if
Yeah,
we're just gonna follow it
15.
word by word,
30%.
maybe we should also add a kind of reevaluation of that bit too.
one
Gotta
of
give
the
them
things
some
that
incentives.
Marlene suggested was to have any ideas of percentages run through a calculation to see if it
Okay.
actually would produce
Right.
moderately priced housing, so.
So maybe just a reevaluation of that, so it's still attractive,
Yeah, she said the 15 should go to 30, right?
yeah, something like that.
Andrew, you brought something up, but is there language that you think should be added to this recommendation about that? It's,
Well, once again, I'm concerned that anytime we use planned development, because of what happened over the last year, it is going to create a big public backlash. And so I actually think, and I didn't know the differences in ORSD and planned development, obviously, because I'm not a planner, but ORSD is specifically mentioned in this section. And I know we talked about ORSD-M and others. I don't like ORSD based on what you said, though, because it doesn't have the things that I think the community wants in creating a zoning district. You know, they want that detail that you're saying in ORSD is a little more vague and a little more open.
Well, it would be maybe